Welcome back to another Reaper blog tutorial. This is what's new in Reaper 6.72. There's a new track grouping manager, plus the ability to edit items based on their track grouping. Super cool, super powerful. And there are other changes across the app. Here's what you need to know. And before we get started, I just want to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you missed any of the previous videos in this series, there will be a link to the full playlist down below. We're going to start this off with some of the smaller, easy to digest changes, and then get into the larger track grouping overhaul. First up, in the action list, add action to view envelopes for last touched track or item. So I've just sorted my action list here by last touched envelope, not script, to reduce the complexity here in the action list, because there are a lot of actions using the word track, using the word last touch, using the word envelope. Now, we did have actions for view envelopes for current or last touch track. Also for takes, we had view take envelopes for last touched first selected item. This new action is view envelopes for last touched track/item. So that's going to be a smarter action that's going to react based on what was last touched. Let's just assign this to Option Shift D. And so if I take an item here and I run that action, the envelope window pops up. I can make the volume visible. I can make the mute envelope visible or not, and then disable them. And hitting that action again will close that window. Now I can click on a track, run that same action, and I get the envelopes for this track. If I had a EQ on here and then run that action again, I would see all of the envelope lanes available for that EQ plus all the track envelopes. This is just a shortcut to get to that envelope window, which would normally be found by clicking on this button. But it's one button press, whether it's a take that's selected or a track that's selected. Razor edits. Support razor edits on master track envelopes, except tempo envelope. If you don't see your master track in the project, you go to the view menu, first option in that list, master track. Let's actually use that shortcut again, which I had on Shift Option D. And here's the envelopes for the master track. I can make the volume and the width visible, and I'll hit that button to hide that window again. I can now make razor edits on the envelopes on the master track. So I can do things like, let's say I just draw in freehand some change. If I want to move that left and right, I can make a razor edit around that, snap that first change to bar 3, easy. If I want to trim this, hover over it. Let's actually make this change slower, so another bar longer. I can stretch it. All the things you would normally do with razor edits is now available in the master track envelopes, except for the tempo map. Media items. Double-click on item volume knob affects all selected items. So first of all, I should show you how you enable the volume knob, which you can see here on an item. So that's going to the preferences, going to appearance and media. And then in this media item buttons section, we've got volume knob enabled. The item volume handle, which is normally at the top edge of the item, set to no handle. So I've got item volume handles. I can select, let's say 3 items, and I'll trim that volume up by 4 dB. Let's take the hi-hat and trim that up by 18 dB. Now the change here, if I select a bunch of items and then double click to reset, the change here is that they will all reset to default. Previously, they would just reset the selected one back to 0. Usually when people are using this, they want to reset everything back to default for the item volumes. And so now that happens with multiple selected items. Batch converter. Support multi-mono conversion to split stereo or multi-channel audio to multiple mono output files. CHID wildcard channel ID replaced by channel number or description. When splitting multi-channel audio, append .c1, .c2, etc. to output file names unless $CHID wildcard is supplied. The batch file converter is found in the File menu. And let's bring in an item. So I'm going to go to my sound library, let's grab these files and drop them in. So this new option here is for multi-mono. So if we go to the channels section, we've got source, mono, stereo, 468, and multi-mono. And also you can just type in here, you could type in 12 if you wanted, in case you didn't know. But multi-mono is going to split whatever's there into separate left and right files. Or if it's a 12 channel file, it'll separate 12 mono files. So I'm going to do multi-mono. This should give me a left and a right. And we can see here in the converted names, the output section, that it will be a C1.wave, meaning channel 1, and it actually in brackets says 2 files. If we don't want it to say C1, we could just do, let's say, $CHID, and now it'll just be the number for the channel ID. But we could also put in bracket L, comma, R, close bracket, and now we've got a left and a right file for each of these. And if this was a multi-channel file, like a surround thing, you could do left, center, right, or left, right, center, etc. So let's just quickly render these. And I'll sort by date modified, and you can see there's a left, there's a right for each of these files. And let's do that one more time here. Let's delete those. We could also change this to say left and right, just as an example. Convert that. And now we've got a left and a right file, even with left spelled wrong. Yeah, so you can specify the description of that channel ID. If you leave it blank, it will be C1, 2, 3, etc. Or you can put in numbers. So that's a pretty cool wildcard added to the file batch item converter. It's worth noting that this change is only in the batch file item converter. If you're rendering your mix, it will still be better to use the stereo option here. Multi-mono isn't available there. Maybe that's coming. I actually don't know. But you can render a stereo version and then quickly drop that output file into the batch file converter. And it only just takes a few seconds to split that up into separate left and right files. For the video processor, increase maximum parameter count to 40, support scroll bar for processor knob bank, use high DPI retina drawing for processor knobs. And that's pretty self-explanatory. When you're in the video processor, it used to be limited to 16 parameters. As you add in the code for the parameters, they would be added on the left side. If you need more parameters than are available, you were kind of screwed. You couldn't add more knobs to it. But now there are. You can have up to 40 here, and this section will scroll. If there's more than the window will show, you can see that scroll bar there. And one of the reasons we actually need more parameters for the video processor is because parameters kind of get used up when you want to have gaps between the controls. So 16 parameters was actually more like 12 parameters, and you can run out pretty quick. For the track manager, add column to display track group membership, double click to open track group settings dialog, add column to expand collapse folders, add option to show hide group child tracks when showing hiding grouping folder track. So let's open up the track manager from the view menu. There's a couple new things here. We've got this column. The third column here is for expanding and collapsing the folder. I have a drums folder there on the left. I can hit this icon. Now we'll collapse all the tracks that are inside of that folder. There's a new group membership column. So you can right click and group track grouping membership. If I select, let's say, the kick through the overheads, that selects them in the project. I can double click in this area, and that brings up the grouping window for those 9 tracks. I could do things like volume lead and volume follow. And so these tracks will have all of their volumes linked now. So once again, I'll just take those out of this, this group, and now they're in no group. Again, we'll come back to grouping in a few minutes. All right, I'm just gonna shrink down my track manager window so you can see this options menu. And we've got this option: when changing visibility or grouping of folder tracks, also change tracks in those folders. Meaning, if I hide my drums folder from the TCP, all of those tracks are also hidden. Hide a folder, it hides all the child tracks as well. Let's uncheck that, and this is back to how it was previous to this update. And hiding the drums folder will only hide the drums folder. So if you use the track manager a lot, these are great updates for you. Track grouping manager. So we're going to go to the view menu, and the track grouping manager is now there below track manager. And now this window is a new way of managing your groups. You may be familiar with the track grouping matrix. This also got some changes. But as you can see here, drastically different way of organizing similar data. So while the track grouping matrix gives you access to all the track grouping attributes, it doesn't really give you the option of changing the colors and changing the names and things like that, where you can do that in the track group manager. Let's do a drums main, and let's do a toms group. So we can enable or disable, we can change the colors, we can show them in the TCP or in the MCP. It will list all the tracks and then the attributes of the group. We can also reorder by just drag and drop the columns. We can sort this list by all groups, groups in use, and groups using the media razor edit groups, which we haven't looked at yet, but we will. So I'm going to grab all of my drums from the kick in to the overheads. I'm going to double click in where it says grouped track list, that section. It's sort of a hidden thing. I don't really like how this works, but if you watch this video, now you know you can double click there, and that will give you this menu: group only selected tracks or add selected tracks to group. And that brings up the grouping window, another shortcut for that basically. And then in here we can do things like setting the volume lead, settings follows, setting razor edit, lead, and follow if we wanted. So let's say we link all of the mute buttons and the follow button, the mute follow buttons for this group. That puts the ribbons over the linked controls, and I'll just close this for now. Set my color here. So I have a different color. I can also set to a random color. This was added to a few of the other managers, setting to random colors. Once we have some tracks in the group, we can see things here for adding to group or seeing what things are in the group. We can remove the selected tracks from a group. So if I just remove my overhead track, right click, double click, remove selected track from group. So now the overhead is not in that group. Can I undo? I can undo that. Yeah, I can show and hide them, and I can disable the group. At the bottom of this window, there are options for automatically grouping items for media and razor editing. All tracks or selected tracks. I will get into that later on, but for now, just know that this group manager window exists. This will be useful when you're using grouping for tracks. There's one small change for the grouping matrix: add option to show hide flags in matrix. So that's this toggle at the top that will, we can show and hide the main grouping attributes like media, razor edit, volume, etc. There's also flags, and the flags are these other 5 options towards the bottom: reverse volume, reverse pan, reverse width, VCA, pre-effects follow, and do not lead when following. So we can show those options in the matrix. And so if I grab 2 tracks and I set these to, let's say, volume lead and reverse volume, that will show them there like that. You wouldn't actually do that. You would take your second track, you would set it to a volume follow, not a volume lead, and then reverse volume, and then the first one you would do like that. So now if I move the kick 1 volume, they go in opposite directions. Why would you do that? There's no reason to, but yeah, you can do that. Grouping. Support track media razor edit groups, including lead follower groups. Add and modify track media razor edit groups via grouping matrix, track group manager, and track group setting dialog. Media item edits on group leader tracks will affect media items on all group follower tracks as if the media items were grouped. Actions that split selected media items respect track edit grouping regardless of media item length or overlap. Razor edits on group leader tracks will be mirrored on all group follower tracks, and many other changelog items relevant to this. So we're going to grab some tracks here and let's group them. Let's just do it from the new track group manager. So I've got those items selected. I will double click here and add the tracks to this group. Let's enable them all for media razor edit follow. And I'm going to select my my drums track, and I'll make that a razor edit lead only. Right, so all of these tracks are basically independent. I'm going to put in one empty MIDI item on the drums folder track. And now if I make a change here, it automatically groups all those tracks. So all of them move together. I can split this item, and now that split happens across all the tracks. And I can move my edit cursor and split again. I can zoom in here. I can alt drag to shift things around. So there may be times when you want to split things in a group, and other times where you want to edit independently. Probably would not edit for drums in this way, but this is something that you can do. So this can be really helpful for your rough edits. So I can see clearly here that that's at a time. And using the faint peaks on the waveform, I can easily kind of line this up. That's one example of how this can be used. So just to repeat the steps there, I selected all my drum tracks. I made them followers for media item edits. And then I set my drum folder track to be a lead for item edits. And so if I have a media item, such as an empty MIDI item, changes that I make to that, whether it's trimming or time stretching or moving its position or moving its contents, those all affect all the other grouped items. And again, this is track-based item editing, not item-based item editing, which is kind of a weird thing. So if I take these, and I'll show you what the normal group editing stuff would be like. I'll add these to a group, and these are items that are grouped, right? If I move them around like that, they stay together. I can trim, I can fade, I can split them. And each time I split, these are basically separate grouped items. You always want to work in columns like this. And I would use this master grouping enable button to make these items independent temporarily. But now you don't necessarily need to use that item-based grouping mode at all. You can use the tracks selection as a way of grouping the items. And then once the tracks are unselected, you can still edit as if they were normal items. Right, and so now that they're linked, and let's say I don't want to have this MIDI item on the track anymore, if I want to delete it, that's going to actually delete everything because they're linked, right? So may not want to do that, but what I can do is just click this button in the main toolbar for turning off grouping, and now this item is independent and it can be deleted. Going back to the track grouping manager, I'm actually going to disable this group. So grouping is turned off. These items, these tracks are independent, but I'm going to enable this option. If I right click, automatically group all tracks for media razor editing. And now I can select any item, I can split it, I can trim it, and that will affect all tracks. And I can razor edit. So if I just make a razor edit anywhere, that will apply to all tracks in the project. I can even make that razor edit selection on the master track or folder track. So that option was automatically group all tracks for media razor editing. And that's also the toggle that we saw in the track group manager at the bottom. Let's try this out with the selected tracks option. So if I wanted, I can make my grouping follow the selected tracks. So first I would select the tracks, and then now if I select an item on that track, it will behave like grouped items or behave like that razor edit media item edit function was enabled, because it is. And you can see which tracks are selected for this function with these kind of flag things on the right side of those mute and solo buttons. So I can split, I can razor edit, and it's always going to keep those 2 tracks selected. I can add a third random track to this, like that. Now these tracks are grouped for editing. I can move things around. So depending on where I'm clicking, that's going to be independent or just in that razor edit area on the selected tracks. And notice that once I click into an empty area, that changes my track selection. That's supposed to happen. That's by default. But when I paste, it will still paste to all of those tracks that they were originally on, or in the same sort of spacing that they were across tracks. It's kind of a new workflow to think about your track selection rather than just having your items selected. For me, it's a little bit hard to get used to, but it's definitely faster than having to drag your razor edit across all the tracks you want. You can just select them first, and then you could just make that razor edit selection across like left to right, and it will automatically spill down to the other selected tracks. Or you could actually assign each to a group, and you can make a razor edit on your lead track, and it will apply to all of your follower tracks. One more quick thing before we go. This is a couple actions that you can use to quickly add tracks to a new razor edit group or remove the tracks from all razor edit groups. If you search for group selected edit, you'll find the option to automatically group selected tracks for media razor editing. That's the one from this thing selected. Create new track razor group from selected tracks, and remove selected tracks from all track media razor editing groups. So let's get some media on this track. This is my actual video edit that you're watching, and I don't want to mess that up, but I can take these 2 tracks, I can create a new group, and now these are grouped together, and I can bypass my group with this button. So if this is off, edit groups are off, on, and if these are lined up, then they will edit again. And I can select these tracks, and so I'll select these tracks, I will remove these tracks from the group, and now they are independent, no grouping enabled anymore. Well, I think that's it. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover. There's so many changelog items related to grouping, mouse modifiers for grouped items, all this stuff. It's worth going through that list again, see if there's anything in there that catches your eye that I didn't cover, because I skipped over the mouse modifier stuff. This video is long enough. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've learned something. If you missed any of the previous videos in the series, click the link down below to view that playlist. Subscribe if you haven't. Check me out on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.